Okay, guys, we have often stated that U.S. tariffs are hazardous. Not only would it isolate the American economy, but it will also call into question long-standing partnerships. And if you believe Trump won't do it, you should think again. His stance on this problem is unwavering, and tariffs may be the only way to push industry back to the United States. He has vowed to set up an external revenue service agency to collect tariff income, essentially hiring money collectors to get foreign corporations to pay their taxes. It is more probable that money will come from U.S. importers, but it might also imply taxes on foreign corporations operating in the United States. Regardless, this police agency is bad news for the planet. It implies everyone will face a tariff war. This would lead to rising inflation in the United States, which is terrible news for Americans. This is also difficult for enterprises that sell in the United States. Choose between lowering your margins to remain competitive or exiting the U.S. markets and losing income. Over the previous 40 years, the effective tariff rate has never exceeded 5%. However, things are about to change. If the United States imposes a 10% universal tariff on the world, the effective rate will rise to 13%. And if Trump hits China with maximal tariffs, the entire rate will rise to 18%. This is enough to wipe out many corporations and enterprises' profit margins. However, the United States will not get off easy. Countries in the BRICS, particularly China, would respond harshly. What's ridiculous is the response from up north. Even Canada has had enough. Their reliance on U.S. consumer markets is under peril, and it appears that Trump is in control. A 25% tariff on Canada might be implemented within the next few days or weeks. Now, Trump claims that the United States does not require Canada's oil and gasoline. But is it true? We need to double-check this since there is a risk of Canadian oil being shut off. Energy export limits are on the table. Not all provinces, including Alberta, are on board. However, according to Canada's foreign minister, the government may impose an oil embargo on the United States. In addition, the commerce minister has acknowledged this. In addition, export taxes on oil and gas to the United States are being considered. So the U.S. may lose the Canadian oil supply that is coming in at a bargain, or they would have to pay significantly more for it. But will it work? Will it harm the United States, or backfire and damage Canada's economy? Now, Canada sends almost 97% of its crude oil to the United States. That's around 4.4 million barrels per day, the highest level since 2010. Canadian oil accounts for 60 to 70% of all U.S. crude imports. This is significant because energy costs in the United States are beginning to recover, owing to Biden's sanctions against Russia, and the global price of petroleum is rising, particularly for Western countries. Losing more than 4 million barrels per day will have a significant impact on U.S. industry. The U.S. might face much higher energy prices, making reshoring factories even more costly. Now, the harm is not limited to production. Cutting Canadian oil will have an impact on petrol costs as well as the products you buy at the grocery store. When energy prices rise, it eventually affects everything. U.S. refineries are becoming increasingly reliant on Canadian oil, and they are prepared to handle heavy crude generated in Canada's oil sands. As a result, 24% of crude oil entering U.S. refineries is straight from Canada. While Canada may lose a lot of money, it would boost U.S. inflation at a key moment when it should be falling. Prices at the pump for gasoline and diesel would undoubtedly rise. If the United States intends to engage in an industrial war with China, energy costs and interest rates must fall rather than rise. In the worst-case scenario, inflation might skyrocket again, forcing the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates higher for longer, slowing U.S. economic development. Trump hurting Canada would also impoverish Americans. It will sting since it is their largest trade partner in the globe, both in terms of imports and exports. The U.S. imports over $480 billion in goods from Canada. A 25% tax would cripple trade into the U.S. Local U.S. businesses may profit, but consumer costs will skyrocket. Canada has also pledged to respond, putting $440 billion of U.S. exports to the Canadian market in danger. This may devastate U.S. corporations and cause earnings to plummet, and that demonstrates how dangerous Trump's trade war is. There is a serious risk that it may send the whole U.S. economy into recession. It would also affect Canada's global perspective. We may witness a Western movement toward BRICS and China, as we have seen in other G7 countries. If the United States decides to shut the world out, the only option is to trade with countries who are attempting to globalize, which would be China. This takes us to the second item we must address, the EU's rescue mission to Mexico. They have already struck a trade agreement ahead of Trump's homecoming. It's a pretty odd arrangement. Yeah, it will assist the EU in certain ways, but it will benefit Mexico more, and it demonstrates Europe's desperation. This was a significant victory for the Mexicans. Let's get into the specifics. Mexico would reduce tariffs of up to 100% on EU commodities such as cheese, chicken, pork, and pasta. That sounds fantastic. Europe can sell more food to Latin America if the US punishes them. But this is when things get weird and uneven. This is where Mexico triumphs and Europe fails to consider the consequences. Of course, this agreement would benefit China as well. The agreement will allow Mexico to sell EVs to the EU common market without paying tariffs. But there is a catch. The cars would have to have at least 60% Mexican or EU-made components by value, which, according to the EU, will make it more difficult for China to utilize Mexico as its manufacturing base. It will be more difficult to produce EVs for the EU there. China will still face a 10% duty if they utilize Chinese batteries. Once again, the EU is anxious for China to establish EV and battery plants in Europe. But will this work? Will this deter Chinese EV businesses from operating in Mexico? First and foremost, China is not developing facilities in Mexico for European markets. They aren't even building plants to sell in the United States. Companies like BYD are expanding into Mexico to serve the Latin American market. Beijing has mostly abandoned direct sales to Western markets. The United States and Canada have a 100% tariff, which is quite severe. The EU follows with an import tax of up to 35%. Chinese automobile sales are already declining in that country, so that is also ruled out. China's government likewise opposes technology transfer to the West. Building a plant in the United States or the European Union would be exceedingly challenging, both financially and in terms of national security. Can the EU and Mexico avoid using Chinese factories to construct their EVs? The answer should be obvious: no. BYD intends to develop a giant plant in Mexico that will produce up to 300,000 units per year. This is when things get hot. BYD is more than just an automotive firm. They are also a massive battery manufacturer. The firm does not purchase its batteries outside. Instead, it manufactures them in-house. BYD vehicles, such as the Dolphin, Shark, and Seal, are manufactured in-house, as are their batteries. It's not from KATL, and Mexico stands to prosper while Europe suffers. By 2030, Chinese businesses will control 70% of global battery capacity. As a result, there is no way around the fact that the majority of EV sales will take place in China. But take a look at the second largest battery manufacturer, BYD. So it is completely possible for them to manufacture batteries in Mexico, and if they do, it will be a Mexican-made product. By then, Chinese EVs built in Mexico may be able to reach the EU market tariff-free. Then Mexico might truly become a manufacturing powerhouse for China's EV sector. Now, this story isn't really about Mexico or even China. It's about the EU attempting to avoid the key question: how can we reduce energy costs? Because if they can, luring EV firms will be simpler, Tesla will increase production, BYD may enter the market, and Volkswagen may even compete. However, things are going to become far worse here. 10 EU nations have called on the bloc to completely prohibit Russian LNG and natural gas, cutting off Europe's last source of inexpensive energy. And if that happens, they will undoubtedly be exposed to Trump's trade war. They would have to replenish the depleted supply with costly U.S. energy. The trend of deindustrialization that we have witnessed will continue to develop, with more firms moving to China and the United States to survive. This is the most pressing issue that Europe must address in order to reverse its energy catastrophe. If the EU shut off its supply of Russian gas, it would lose at least 15 million metric tons of LNG per year, or 7% of its overall gas imports. There is only one word left to describe the outcome: disastrous. The domino effect would be disastrous. All of the world's trade accords may not be sufficient if costs continue to rise in the EU. This is a fantastic example of putting the cart ahead of the horse. To defeat U.S. terrorism, the EU must address its own energy dependence dilemma. Now, I used to make proposals like restarting nuclear reactors, but I've given up since it won't happen. They have their own plans and won't listen. Canada's proposal, on the other hand, is straightforward: mutually assured economic misery. If you hammer me, I'll hammer you back, and we'll both be harmed. China's strategy is to divorce fully from the United States, using its stimulus to boost domestic demand, implying that the rest of the world would respond. As much as Trump wants this trade war, he may not win it all, and Europe may fall, but I am certain that the BRICS will put up a strong fight. But tell me what you think. Would Canada truly eliminate all exports to the U.S.? And what are the EU's remaining options? Please let me know in the comments. Remain safe, and remember to like and subscribe as we traverse these tumultuous times.